Welcome to our YouTube video. We are Kirsch's Angels, and today we're discussing the topic that drugs don't work. In the media, there has been a lot published about the effectiveness of antidepressants and if they are suitable for people to use as a treatment for depression. But in order to understand this, we need to understand first, what is depression? Depression is a clinical condition characterized by certain symptoms: the loss of being able to perform daily tasks, strong negative feelings towards themselves and the world, including feelings of worthlessness, alongside suicidal thoughts about ending one's life. While depression is a complex condition that affects different people in different ways, these are the main symptoms and signs of depression, and these must persist for 2 or more weeks to be considered clinical depression. What are antidepressants then? Given that it is such a debilitating condition, there are treatments made in order to combat the symptoms and feelings of depression. One of these treatments are antidepressants. The term antidepressants refers to the group of drugs used to combat depression. While there are many types of antidepressants, the most commonly prescribed and therefore the most commonly used are SSRIs, an acronym for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. How do these work? Neurons are cells within the body that transmit information both within the brain and the body. However, neurons are not directly attached to each other. There are small gaps between them called the synaptic gap. There therefore needs to be a messenger that helps the two neurons communicate across this gap. One of these chemical messengers is serotonin, which helps transmit signals within the brain, and one of its roles is to regulate mood. Antidepressants like SSRIs work by targeting this chemical. In people with depression, serotonin goes back into the neuron too quickly and therefore does not have enough time to transmit the signal between the neurons. SSRIs prevent the serotonin from going back into the neuron and therefore ensure the signal gets passed along. This therefore decreases the symptoms of depression due to serotonin's link in regulating mood.
There is a lot of controversy around the clinical effectiveness of antidepressant medication in treating depression. You might have heard headlines claiming antidepressants don't work. Where did that idea come from? Let's explore a key study that shook things up in 2008. Firstly, let's look at the background of this topic. Before antidepressants can be prescribed, they need to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration in America, also known as the FDA, and the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, known as the NICE. To do that, scientists run clinical trials. These trials compare how well the drug works compared to a placebo, a fake pill with no ingredient. When examining depression, researchers look at how much people's depressive symptoms improve on a scale called HRSD. According to the NICE, if the drug helps improve scores by at least 3 points more than a placebo, it is considered effective. And this is the criteria for a clinically significant result. These results are commonly combined together into a meta-analysis to provide researchers with a clearer picture of how effective antidepressants really are. A meta-analysis is like creating a super review. Meta-analyses are the gold standard of research as they provide stronger, more reliable conclusions than one study alone. Now let's have a look at what the background around this topic is. Previous research examining the effectiveness of drug therapies for depression report small benefits over placebo treatments. For example, a meta-analysis by the FDA found a difference of 1.8 points in HRSD scores, not reaching the clinical significance criteria. Kirsch and his colleagues hypothesized that these modest results may have been obscured due to varied depression severity. Furthermore, previous studies are limited to only published data, which could leave out less favorable findings. This is known as reporting bias. To address these gaps in previous research, Kirsch and his colleagues conducted a new meta-analysis. They used all FDA clinical trial data, both published and unpublished, to avoid a reporting bias. Furthermore, they examined depression severity as a variable that might influence the results and explain previously insignificant results. Let's see how convincing it is.
The researchers obtained all clinical trials submitted to the FDA and FDA trials published on a website called PubMed. 2 separate investigators were used to establish that all published trials included in the analysis were relevant, and they came to an agreement of 100%. While some studies didn't fit the criteria due to the omission of including a change in mean score, 47 clinical trials were selected for the meta-analysis. A typical trial works like this. A sample is selected. These patients would randomly be allocated to either a placebo group or the drug group. This investigates whether the drug is truly the driving force behind the improvement of depressive symptoms, or it is the cognitive support it provides that changes symptoms. Their treatments would last up to Their improvement would be measured according to the Hamilton Rating Scale for Depression before and after their course of the drug or placebo. So what did they find?
The results were calculated by comparing before and after scores on the HRSD. For groups provided with antidepressants, they found a mean improvement on the scale by 9.60 points as compared to the placebo group, which underwent a mean improvement of 7.80 points. This yielded a mean drug-placebo difference of around 1.8 points, which is a value below the 3-point criteria of significance used by the NICE. Therefore, while the difference between the improvement scores of both groups by itself is significant and has statistical reliability, it struggles to reach clinical significance, which means that it may not make much of a difference in clinical settings. The average improvement for the drug groups was 1.24 and for the placebo groups was 0.92, both effects of considerable magnitude. However, the difference between the two groups is 0.32, falling below the standardized threshold suggested by the NICE of 0.5. It is also important to note that the amount of change varied widely around the means for both groups, and therefore the mean change in score showcased during the trials could potentially provide a poor description of the results.
Therefore, this article draws to the conclusion that if all data, both published and unpublished, is taken into account, then the effectiveness of antidepressants do not reach the criteria for clinical significance. Alongside this, the article points out how large the placebo effect is within the research, and therefore how little the drug itself actually does. To showcase this, the article outlines how the placebo effect was equivalent to 80% of what the drug condition experienced, showing that the drug itself accounted for a small proportion of the effect, and that in fact the placebo may have done much of the heavy lifting. The placebo effect also contributed to the conclusion that there was no relation between the severity of the depression and how effective antidepressants were. This is because the article highlights how the placebo effect diminishes in people with more severe depression, and therefore makes it appear as if the drug is having a more significant effect, when in fact it is not.
Arguments for. A strength is that the study has external research support. A study by the University of Helsinki revealed that cholesterol may be an intervening factor as to why antidepressants are not as effective as first thought. But how does this work? They found cholesterol binds to the same receptor sites as antidepressants, which highlights how interactions of antidepressants in the brain may be more complex than initially thought. This supports Kirsch et al.'s study, as cholesterol levels are unique to the individual and would uniquely affect how effective the antidepressant is for each person. Furthermore, the genetic makeup of an individual is also very unique, which is important as genetics can determine metabolism and the efficacy of related enzymes. You may ask, why is this relevant to antidepressants though? I'll give you an example. A person that has a good metabolism may metabolize the antidepressant too quickly, which will mean they do not reuptake the serotonin and still experience depressive symptoms as a result. This shows how individual differences are overlooked when considering drug efficacy. This is further reinforced by research conducted in 2025, revealing that individuals with depression had significant changes in gut microbiota, which are the microbes that make up the human gut. This indicates that antidepressant research should target the gut microbiome and its metabolites, or that other treatments are more suitable. But why is this important? This is because it has major implications for clinical psychology, as antidepressants are widely prescribed nowadays, which emphasize the need for other treatments like therapy, at least in addition. Another strength of this study is the choice of using a meta-analysis and the measures that were taken to ensure its validity. This is because the researchers only chose trials that were double-blind, so neither the researcher or the participant knew who got the placebo, and they were also randomized, which minimized any influence that the original researcher may have had in biasing the results. In addition, the FDA has rigorous standards for clinical trials, which includes independent reviews and evaluation visits of trials. This is important because Kirsch et al. Included all studies deemed adequate by FDA reviewers, which limited the extent that methodological characteristics may impact the results. This is important as it provides more weight behind the findings of the study and may persuade the psychological community to consider their controversial finding that drugs don't work and prompt further research into alternative treatments of depression as a consequence.
The study's findings are strengthened by other research as well. For example, Fournier et al. In 2010 conducted a meta-analysis investigating the effect of antidepressants and depression severity, and similar to Kirsch et al. Found that antidepressant effectiveness varies according to the initial severity of depression. They were much more effective in cases of severe depression compared to the placebo. More recent research into antidepressants also supports Kirsch et al.'s findings. The 2020 meta-analysis by Mancomb et al., while studying individual responses to antidepressants, found the difference between the effectiveness of antidepressant drugs and placebos was small, only about 2 points on the HRSD, reinforcing the idea that antidepressants may not be as effective as generally believed. Additionally, the study eliminates publication bias. They obtained all the trial data from the FDA on 6 new antidepressants and evaluated both published and unpublished data. An important requirement of the FDA licensing process is for controlled research to publish all of the findings, regardless of positive or negative results. This is a strength for the study because it ensures a more accurate representation of the findings and prevents the findings from being selective towards only positive results, and therefore it could also help in ensuring more accurate treatments for depression while prioritizing patient health.
When looking at arguments against, it is important to consider the conflicting findings. Turner and Rosenthal did a very similar meta-analysis to Kirsch's study and concluded that drugs were clearly superior to the placebo, despite getting practically the same result. How does this happen? Turner and Rosenthal argued that the interpretation of the results depends on how one defines clinical significance. Another study by another researcher repeated Kirsch's study using the same dataset, and again concluded drugs have superiority. This study used different statistical methods to analyze the data, including something called a multi-meta analysis. The replications of the study point out errors in Kirsch et al.'s original calculations, as well as selective and biased interpretations of the result. Another weakness of this study is experimental bias. Kirsch et al. Has done a vast amount of research in order to conclusively prove that his findings are correct. However, one has to question his motive behind this. It is clear that Kirsch specifically believes that antidepressants are not effective. In fact, he stands by this claim to this day. He said, instead of curing depression, popular antidepressants may induce a biological vulnerability, making people more likely to become depressed in the future. Claims like these demonstrate the obvious bias behind his research papers. In this same paper, Kirsch stated that the serotonin theory of depression is the closest thing in science history to being proved wrong. It is out-of-pocket claims like these that diminish our confidence in Kirsch's objectivity.
Another weakness of the article, given that this study did not lead to a revolution within treating depression, it can be safe to assume that the value of SSRIs are acknowledged by the psychology community and that there is a general agreement that SSRIs have a use within treating depression. This means that even if SSRIs are not a complete miracle treatment, they still have their use that the study minimizes. Furthermore, ways of measuring depression have evolved over time and the HRSD is no longer used. Therefore, the study has weak temporal validity, which refers to when a study maintains valid findings over time, and should be replicated using more current diagnostic techniques.
Whilst the meta-analysis covered a wide range of studies that demonstrated a common finding, it can be criticised for some methodological flaws. Firstly, they used no trials that included children and adolescents. This is a problem because depression is a very common disorder amongst adolescents, and so this data would have been vitally important in its implications for how to best treat teens. Due to the unrepresentative sample, the study lacks generalizability to all patients and cannot apply to younger populations. Another issue was extraneous variables. This is anything other than the drug affecting the change in HRSD score. This is because 25 trials reported using a psychoactive medication. This is a substance that can alter mood, consciousness, and perception. Why is this important? Well, because it may mean that the insignificant finding was a result of interactions between the psychoactive medication and the SSRI, and it is this influence that may be responsible for the appearance that antidepressants drugs don't work. This is emphasized by the properties of chloral hydrate, a type of psychoactive drug that was reportedly used in the study, as it is a sedative and hypnotic drug. This may explain a worsening or neutrality in depressive symptom scores. Further inquiry is necessary in the absence of psychoactive drugs. This is to isolate the efficacy of antidepressants.
We believe that Kirschatel's study takes a stance that is too black and white. It is not possible to just decisively ask, do antidepressants work? And then determine the answer is no without considering other explanations, like the ones mentioned before. It is more likely that antidepressants have varying effects for different people and become more effective when combined with other psychological treatments. What do you think? Hit the like button if you agree with us. Bye guys, don't forget to subscribe for more of the Kirsch's Angels.